Hello everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Gaming in the Wilds, a video games podcast about games from the artistic, creative side of the tracks, from indie to AAA. My name's John, I'm your host. I'm a journalist based out in Reykjavik, Iceland, where this week I've been planning an exhibition actually. I don't know if I've mentioned it on the show before, but way back in my university studies I actually studied art practice, and so I'm having my first exhibition, my first solo show for quite a few years, and I've been working on it for a while, so it's been really exciting to reconnect with that part of my brain and to get those old gears turning and gear up towards an exhibition that will happen at the end of May. So that's been taking up a lot of my time. It's been a really enjoyable process, re-engaging with art practice. But alongside that, I've also had plenty of time for playing games. I've played a few interesting games in the last week actually. The one that took up most of my time, I think I spent probably 7 or 8 hours on it. It's hard to tell. I played it on Switch, and so they haven't dropped on me my playtime yet. It just says first played 5 days ago. I wish the Switch would do that. I wish it would tell you how long you'd played, you know? But it's a retro-futurist kind of pixel art platformer with a really cool story and a fantastic art style called Narita Boy. And it came out, it's the first game published by a Spanish game dev, and it was published by Team 17, the classic publisher that I even remember from Amiga games back in the 90s. So I'll be talking about that one as the featured game of the show, and we're listening to some of the epic synthwave soundtrack now. But I also dipped into a couple of other games too, 2 very different games actually. The first one is The Longing, which you might have seen if you watched Nintendo's recent Indie World Direct, where they show off the work of indie games that are coming to Switch. It's a very strange game, it's really unusual. It's an idle game, which means that time passes in real time in the game, whether you're playing it or not. You play as a small shade who has been told to wait 400 days by his king, who needs to go into a deep trance to rekindle his power. And all that you can do in those days is wander around a huge labyrinthine palace and the surrounding tunnels and hallways, where there is not an awful lot to do, and your shade is a little black guy made out of coal, and he just trudges around the hallways and has these kind of sad existential thoughts about loneliness and about time, how to make the time pass faster. And it's a really not like anything else I've played. It doesn't at all try to win your attention. It's kind of trolling your attention. The walking speed of your character is very slow, and so you end up just watching this little guy trudge across the screen with this kind of Gollum-y, feet flapping sound. And occasionally a highlight might be that you'll find a piece of chalk, and that might be the highlight of your play session. But I have been engaging with it. Something about it has kept me coming back so far. So I've played a little bit of The Longing, and I'll be playing some more of it. Another game that came up in conversation with my friend Kieran Daly from the Radical Art Review was Bioshock Infinite. I've played Bioshock 1 for maybe an hour and enjoyed it, but bounced. Bit creepy, first-person shooter, not exactly my thing. But this Bioshock Infinite came up in the context of a conversation about cool game stories, sci-fi stories, especially mind-bending ones. And he said it's a bit different to Bioshock 1, so I had it on my PlayStation because I got it on PS Plus, so it was there anyway. I haven't bought it, but I have it anyway. And so I loaded that one up and I played a few hours of it. And I actually had a really good time. It's a kind of seat-of-the-pants adventure game where you're kind of thrust from situation into situation. It's a first-person shooter, but I just played it on easy because I couldn't really be bothered with that part of it. And that makes it kind of a satisfying sort of blasting your way through everyone fest without much danger. So you go from narrative beat to narrative beat and just blast a few baddies away in between. And it's a little like Fallout in that it has a kind of a retro futurist thing going on. It's like old style Americana with, hot dog stands and barbershop quartets and all this kind of American grandiosity of like explorers and history museums that patch over America's problematic history and all this kind of stuff. But it's also a sci-fi setting, so you're in a kind of a floating city in the sky. And I have to say, it was really fun as a kind of a Hollywood cinematic spectacle of a game. it certainly ticked all the boxes, and it has me intrigued enough to see what happens in the story. So I think I'll be blasting my way through some more Bioshock Infinite across the couple of weeks as well. It's a nice tonic if you balance it against the kind of the arty indie games that I'm playing. Sometimes it's nice to just park in front of the TV and play a blockbuster, and so that's what I've been doing, and I'll be talking more about it. But before I launch into talking about Narita Boy, I wanted to give a shout out to the newest patron of the show, Stefan, who signed up on Patreon and became a main quest patron at the $3 tier a month. And for that, Stefan will get my thanks. He will also get access to some patron-only episodes that are in the backlog of patron-only episodes about music, a spoiler cast about the Outer Wilds, an end-of-year music roundup from the end of last year, and I've got more planned because Stefan is my 15th patron, which means that I've met my first patron goal, and we'll start making a special patron-only series of podcasts that will talk about my entire history in playing games from the 80s, where we had an Acorn Electron computer, which I guess most people probably don't even know what that is, but it was around at the same time as the ZX Spectrum. Right through to Commodore Amiga, the early Nintendo consoles and handhelds, some Sega consoles, original Xbox, and a couple of generations of PlayStation. So if you're interested in hearing special episodes that kind of look back on fun episodes of my personal gamer history, but also very interesting kind of old pockets of gamer culture and classic games that you might remember, that's going to be starting up on my Patreon. If you're interested in joining, it's at patreon.com/gaminginthewild from as little as $1 a month. So thanks to Stefan, and thanks to you if you're thinking of signing up. And with that out of the way, let's move on and talk about the game of the episode, Narita Boy. Narita Boy! So when I first saw Narita Boy popping up in my internet feeds, for some reason I thought this was a retro classic that was being reissued, like a genuine old game that was coming back and being reissued on modern systems, partially because I think they use that text in promoting the game, because they say Narita Boy was a 1980s bestseller, one of the best-selling games the world has ever seen, and I was like, I don't remember that game. But as it turns out, that's part of the story of the game, and it's actually a completely new game, but it draws really, really heavily on 1980s and early 90s pop culture and gamer culture. And so I guess it was like a kind of a neat marketing trick. It kind of actually feels pretty good to have the wool pulled over your eyes and to be investigating this game, thinking that it's something old, and to find out that it's actually something new. And the developers describe it as an action platformer and an action adventure, but that doesn't really tell you the whole story. I will soon. It's the first game released by Studio Koba, a Spanish studio. This is their first project. It's published by Team 17, and it came out on March 30th of this year, so it's a very new game. Maybe the most recent game that I've ever covered on the show, actually, this close to launch. It's currently available on the Switch, the PS4, and for Windows and Mac at $25 or £20, and it was also a day one release on Game Pass. So if you are an Xbox user, as I know some listeners are, hi Hopple, then you can play it straight away. It was kickstarted and it raised €160,000 with a goal of only €120,000 with 5,000 backers that helped it get it over the finish line. And it's currently scoring about 7.5 on Metacritic, that is with critics, and about 6.5 with users, which is quite surprising to me. I mean, some of the critic scores vary from between sort of 7 to 9, and I get the feeling that it's been pulled down by a couple of uncharacteristically low scores. But because it's such a new game, I imagine that will even out over time, and I imagine it's going to end up being around an 8 out of 10 on Metacritic. The user scores from the reviews that I scanned seem to be mostly about some early game-breaking bugs from the first couple of weeks that I think have been patched out already, because I only experienced one crash in my whole 7-ish hour run on the game. But on a high level takeaway from this one, it's a carefully crafted love letter to the 1980s, games and pop culture and music, with great pixel art, synth-pop soundtrack, a strong retro-futurist aesthetic, a surprisingly tender story, a little bit of dodgy platforming, made up for by some pretty solid hack-and-slash gameplay. So you'll spend a lot of the time of this game playing kind of arcadey combat, sword in hand, battling bad guys, and you'll spend the rest of it wandering through a kind of a beautiful pixelated world, talking to people, learning about the digital realm and your role in it. The game has a really complex, like hilariously complex at times, deep storyline that's jargon-packed, semi-legible, happening between the real world and the digital dimension. And it's kind of intentionally overcomplicated, in my opinion, but in a really fun sci-fi kind of way, where they're always just throwing a lot of terminology and words at you, and you never really get the full thing, at least not on your first playthrough. But it's the kind of game that wholly convinces you that there is a really deep, thought-out world here and a story here that you could probably get if you're the type of person that likes to dive into Reddit boards, notice details, puzzle away at the kind of the architecture of this strange world that you're in. Then you'll get a lot of enjoyment from this game. But me personally, I just treated all of that stuff as interesting colour for the game and kind of skated across it. And it added a lot to it. It fleshed out the world in a way that was really fun. So the story is kind of a load of tangled sci-fi nonsense. I mean, that seems kind of mean, but that's how it read to me. I'm sure it makes a lot of sense. But I'm going to give you a little run through it. The game begins when the real-life Narita Boy, and why he is Narita Boy isn't quite clear. Narita is the name of, obviously, Tokyo's international airport, but it's also the name of a nearby city called Narita, and it's also a Japanese forename. So maybe he's a boy called Narita, maybe he's a boy from Narita, maybe he's a boy who's flying into Narita, who knows. But anyway, Narita Boy is transported from his bedroom through the screen of an old school, a sort of Macintosh-looking computer, to the digital kingdom, in a way that reminded me of like things like Tron and the Lawnmower Man. You know, when someone's sucked into a computer and they are reconstituted in a digital realm, in that classic like 80s film premise. That's how it begins. You arrive on a beautiful mountaintop. It's not exactly a blue wireframe sci-fi environment, although there is plenty of that in the game. But you arrive on a mountaintop and there are some monks awaiting your arrival who direct you to meet Motherboard, and she's a robed figure who appears as a kind of a vision in front of you, a little bit like Princess Leia from the R2-D2 projection in Star Wars. And this is a reference-loaded game, so it's the first of many. And Motherboard explains to you that you're in the digital realm, a world made up of code, where programs have achieved consciousness, and they kind of manifest in different forms that reflect their personalities and their roles with different characteristics. And they're split into houses. There is a religion-based blue house of kind of pious worshippers of the code. There is a yellow house, which is like a kind of a funny fantasy kingdom with a king and knights and that sort of thing. And then the red house, which is where all the problems of the game are coming from. And when these three coloured houses are in balance, they form the Trichroma, which is like a ribbon of yellow, blue and red that is the ideal state of this code religion that they live by. But the Trichroma has fallen out of balance because the red house has gone nuts. There is a bad guy called Him who has kind of made all of the red programs go mental, and those are the bad guys you're going to be fighting as you battle through the game and try and restore order to the Force. So that's the broad outline of the game. You'll be travelling through the digital realm, through all of these different biomes and programs and environments, meeting really interesting characters from all of these different digital houses, helping them solve their problems, unlocking blocked gateways so that you can move forward in the game, communing with digital saints and gurus, battling the Stallions, which is the name of the red bad guys, and liberating the digital kingdom. But as you do so, it becomes clear that there is like a strong sense of mysticism in this digital realm, for all of the 80s pop cultural stuff of like people with their heads plugged into big computer rigs and CRT texture and all of this kind of 80s referential sci-fi stuff, there is a sense of mysticism in the game that is quite interesting. It's like a mixture of digital Shinto and a kind of a pseudo-religion of worshipping the creator of the code, who is a programmer that you'll see in the intro sequence of the game. He's the real-world person who created this digital realm and quite a prominent character in the game. And Narita Boy has like a kanji on his grey hoodie that is like an image of balance with a line down the middle of it. And that will recur throughout the game on flags and to signify interesting points that you're supposed to look at and things like that. There will be lots of talk of meditating to become one with the code. You'll find places where people worship the code and they're trying to kind of come into singularity with it. That seems to be the aim of a lot of the people here. And there is imagery of digital beings praying and genuflecting, kneeling and meditating. And some of the bad guys appear as like pinned up on red crucifixes, and they seem to be into the dark arts. There's lots of kind of sorcery and witchcraft going on with the polluted red code. So it has strong religious overtones. But as well as that, there is like ambient music that'll play when you're in shrines and holy trees, people worshipping the creator, the image of the creator. And they seem to think of Narita Boy as a kind of a savior figure, kind of like if Jesus had a lightsaber. So it's a mash of Japanese culture, pop mythology, otaku, tech fandom culture, and religion. And it's quite interesting in that way. It gives the game a lot of texture, and I really appreciated that as I was going from place to place as the kind of the savior figure of the digital kingdom. It's kind of 80s film premise, you know what I mean? But it has all of this additional texture added to it. And that comes in the art style too. There are so many beautiful moments in this game and really fun characters. From that picturesque mountaintop that you first appear on, which looks like it's a pixel art being played on like a VHS tape. It's crazy textural. And there are these Tron-like futuristic wireframe areas. There is the ancient pathway, which is like a pixel-rendered forest with animals and rabbits and birds that fly away when you come near, some of which are just a couple of pixels that just flap up into the air with a digital tweeting sound. There is a desert area with wagons of refugees fleeing, a foggy waterway with a lighthouse, the pious blue area with the hooded monks worshipping the code. You'll meet the synth sensei who plays this kind of Beethoven meets Kraftwerk, really funny music. And you'll meet pilgrims and fortunates, people that need your help. And of course, the enemies. And the combat is a big part of this game too. It's not all just wandering and talking to monks, as nice as that would be. It's quite an action-packed game. So I'll run you through the combat and platforming gameplay next. So at the start of the game, Narita Boy gets his Techno-Sword, which is a multi-purpose weapon that starts off pretty basic with some swiping and a charged hit. But pretty quickly, you get in a fast succession, you get upgrades including an uppercut, a down strike, a charge strike, dash, dodge, and some other exotic late-game abilities that I won't spoil for you now. You also get a very short-range shotgun blast and a kind of a charged laser with a cooldown time to reload that, so you can only use it now and then. And combat happens in arena battles that happen as you explore. The stallions start off as fairly bumbling, shambling kind of zombie creatures with very simple attacks, but new enemy types are introduced in fast succession. And every time you meet one, its name will flash up on the screen. The first major one that you meet is the Skull Code, which is a kind of a heavy set enemy that shuffles towards you and has a heavy blade attack that you have to dodge and hit. Then you get fluttering bats. They're actually quite troublesome. They just flutter towards you in unpredictable ways, and they can really sap you even more than the heavy-duty baddies. And they're called bads. And then you'll meet various spectres, light and heavy troops that jump at you or charge at you, different kinds of flying creatures, all with different attack patterns that you have to learn. But they're introduced very well, very sequentially. There are also lots and lots of bosses in this game. I think I can remember 7 or 8 bosses, And in a 7 or 8 hour game, that means you're getting bosses pretty frequently. And they vary from being kind of really fun to look at, but kind of inconsequential to beat, through to being quite tough. I think some of them took 4 or 5 goes for me to take them down. But they were all very fun, and they were all very different. There were some ones that are kind of invisible, ones that attack from above, ones that are giant, ones that are kind of just small and fast moving. And they were all really interesting, all really surprising, and they all add to the variety of gameplay, which rattles past pretty quickly. It doesn't feel like a long game as you're playing it. Time really flies when you're playing this game. But as you're progressing, the arena battles will intensify so that different combinations of enemies are introduced, and they all need different takedowns. Like there's a skeleton that holds a shield, and you have to shoulder charge him to stun him briefly before you can hit him. So if you're doing him at the same time as the bads that are fluttering towards you from above that you have to avoid, and then you have these kind of troops running around and kind of trying to smash into you, then it can get pretty frantic. And you do get a feeling of being a total badass sometimes if you clear a room really well. But other times it's not so good, and you kind of feel like you're going through the motions a little bit, and it's just a matter of learning which baddies appear when, so you can tailor your strategy. So there are good sides and bad sides to it. It's never quite as perfectly balanced as I would say a game like Hyper Light Drifter or even Hollow Knight, which feels similar, but those two games are much more crisp and controllable, and you feel much more in control with them. Narita Boy feels a little basic by comparison, but it does have all of those same move sets, so players of those games will feel at home in Narita Boy. And I really did appreciate the amount of inventiveness that was pumped into the game throughout. And that doesn't just come in the enemy styles, it comes in the different modes of traversal. I don't want to spoil them in case you haven't played the game, but there are lots of moments that, that this game didn't have to have, but have been put in there just to elevate it, basically. Where Narita Boy can transform, or you'll move between worlds in interesting ways. I won't spoil it more than that, but I will say that there is a sense of real investment of love and time into this game, and inventiveness that will keep you happy and engaged as you move through the game. It's a real love letter to the 80s computer culture and to the hack and slash platformers of that time. With loads and loads of cultural references in it, but it also looks forward in a really interesting way. It's not a pure retro game. It does feel modern too. It feels like a very modern take on games of that era. So perhaps it's especially going to hit home with people that lived through that era, or have a vague interest in retro games and the history of games, but want quite a slick modern playing experience. And Narita Boy does offer that. And in terms of kind of high retro, I think that's what I would call it, or kind of elevated retro games, a little bit like Fez and Hyper Light Drifter, games that I've talked about on the show before, games that feel like artistic and forward-looking takes on classic games. Narita Boy fits into that mold, and in that respect, just like those two games that I mentioned, Fez and Hyper Light Drifter, it seems to welcome obsessive fandom, and I certainly felt a little bit of that. I felt a little bit of being drawn to it. I found myself wanting a Narita Boy hoodie with the balance kanji on the front of it. No one else around me would know what it meant, but I just think it's like a super cool design. And the design of this game really does shine through in many ways. But unfortunately, there are bad sides to Narita Boy, and if you've looked at any of the critical response to it, you will know that. There are some design choices that are a little mystifying to me. Like Narita Boy's jump is really strange. It feels like it's delayed from when you press the button. It feels like he hangs in the air for too long. It never feels intuitive. And so I was constantly jumping off stuff, jumping into kind of kill on contact water, or falling into puddles, or jumping into the attacks of bad guys, because the jump is just kind of bad. And it's a little mystifying that so much attention has been lavished onto the details of the game, and yet there are a few design flaws in it that really take the shine off the experience at moments. Another one is that I'll often feel like I came to a dead end and just be wandering around backtracking. There were a couple of times I even looked up a YouTube video to find that the player in the walkthrough was just as stuck as I was, and eventually realised there was high platforms that you're supposed to hop up that just look completely invisible because they look like background graphics. Also, sometimes foreground graphics look like platforms and you'll jump on them and die. And so there are lots of small frustrations that come with this game too. Also, there is no map, and you'll often be finding keys and then going back to several different doors that you visited. But they're all called quite kind of long, unmemorable names, like the door of the Trichroma of the third night of the second order of the Yellow House. And you'll be thinking, well, if there's 3 doors named that, you just have to go and try them all. But there is no map to tell you which one you're supposed to go to. I'm going to try and get all of the negative critique out of the way quickly and just rattle through it, because I hate dunking on games and I hate listening to people dunk on games, but I do feel that in the name of balance, it's important to tell you this stuff. So just to finish off the critiques that I've got in my notes here, there are some bad restart points in this game. For example, there was one boss called Static, I think it was called, Black Static, something like that. And I died a few times on this one. It took me a while to figure out his patterns for some reason. And the restart point was like 4 screens back, so you just have to run through those 4 screens every time you want to restart. And there are some points where, like when you come through a battle and emerge with, say, 2 health left, there's no way to regenerate your health really, so you're just going to die the next battle you come to. So why not be generous to the player and just let the health regenerate after a big battle, so that when you come into the next one, it saves you a needless death, and you're just fighting with a fair chance. Or at the very least, just put restart points after every battle at the start of every new screen. And I did come back and play the opening section of this game again, which does speak to the sheer appeal of it, that I wanted to do that. But I noticed that even having played through to the end and become quite good at it, like having taken down the final boss and done all of that stuff, there are no difficulty settings, by the way, so you just have to suck it up and get through it. But even after having completed the game and become very aware of all of the systems, I found the same problems again. I found the same dead ends again. I found myself floating off of platforms and dying unnecessarily again because of the imprecise floaty jump. And I found myself getting confused about which doors were which. So even on a second playthrough, I think that underlines the point that this is a design problem and not a player problem, because I always jump to the conclusion that it's probably me being dumb. Actually, I think in this case it's game design flaws. And so unfortunately, Narita Boy has quite a few of those. It does take the shine off the gameplay, the platforming sucks, and some of the battles are a bit frustrating, restart points, etc. But all in all, it's a wonderful game. I do recommend it. I will play through it again probably. I really enjoyed it. The world is just so compelling, so detailed. It's a really wonderful construction, a kind of a love letter to retro gaming that also just pushes that whole medium forwards by adding such imagination to it. So I had a great time with Narita Boy. If you have it on Game Pass, definitely give it a try. If it sounds like your kind of thing, then I would say jump on it straight away. If you are agnostic after hearing this review, I would say at $25, I'd probably wait for a sale, pick it up when it's 15 or 10, and just give it a try and see if it's for you then. But for the most part, I highly recommend it. I think it's going to be a cult classic. That's Narita Boy! Narita Boy! So that was Narita Boy. Love a game with a good theme song. Hope you enjoyed hearing about it. I kind of feel bad about dunking on games, even when they've kind of got problems that are, not just me, but in every review. Makes me feel bad. I don't know. I don't like listening to it when I hear other podcasts where people are dunking on games really hard. I guess if people are listening to a podcast, they might have found it because they like the game. But I assume that there are a bunch of regular listeners out there that just want to hear an honest review of a game. So that was Narita Boy. I really enjoyed it. I hope I didn't put anyone off it. It's a good game. So that was the episode. I'll be back next week with a new one. I'm not sure what it will be about yet. Let me just scroll up to the top of my list here. I've got a bunch of games on the slate. I'm finally due to do an Immortals Phoenix Rising. It's been so long since I was supposed to do that episode. I was supposed to do it with Sam Daniels, aka Clover_E exe, and I was supposed to do it with Adam Switch Indie Fix, and for reasons it didn't come together. So maybe I'm just going to do that one solo. It's finally time to talk about that game. I feel very bad about that for Ubisoft, who were good enough to send me a code. I should also mention that Team 17 were good enough to send me a code for Narita Boy, which I really appreciate. I've also got Orwell's Animal Farm, which I'll be playing soon. It's a game that Louis recommended in our 2020 game roundup. It was one of his games of the year, so I'm very curious to try that. I'm also about to finish Nuts, finally, so I'll be covering that again. I've got The Longing, I've got Iris and the Giant, I've got a whole bunch of other games lined up, so much more to come, and those will be coming across the coming weeks. If you would like to find me on social media and say hello, you can do so at Gaming in the Wild on Twitter, on Instagram, and on Twitch. I'm most active on Twitter, so do come and say hi there if you've played the game, if you have thoughts about it. I'd love to hear them. You're also extremely welcome to come and join the Patreon community. I'm very, very grateful to all of my patrons, so thank you if you're a patron, and thank you if you're thinking of becoming one. That's patreon.com/gaminginthewild. That's it from me this week. Take care of yourselves and each other. See you next week. Bye-bye for now.